We are back again with live podcasting from the Canadian Alliance and Homelessness Conference, biggest conference of its kind in North America. I'm Michael Braithewaite from Blue Door, your host. So this podcast is a joint venture between Blue Door and, of course, the people putting on this awesome conference, the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. It's a weekly podcast. This is our first venture doing live podcasting because we have amazing people here doing groundbreaking and impactful work. So excited to be here today. Today I am joined by Marie-Cécile Cote, and she presented this morning. We're going to talk about that presentation. Very impactful and very important work. Before we get to that, we ask every guest on this podcast a question because it means something different to everyone. There's no right or wrong answers, but that is, what does home mean to you?
Home, when I think about home, I think about back home. I think about Nigeria, the Philippines. I'm an immigrant. I've been in Canada for almost 20 years. And home means where my family is, where my connections are. But since I've moved to Canada, I now have my own family, my husband and my 2 kids. So home means a place that's safe, a place where they are, a place that we feel accepted, and a community that embraces us.
Amazing. And you said something key there to our conversation too, around accepted, right? And that's what home, that feeling. And you'll understand why in a minute when we talk about Marie-Cécile's work that she is doing. Talk to us a little bit about, so our listeners get to know you, your journey into this work. How did you end up doing what you're doing now, and kind of walk us through some of that?
Yeah, I will have to start from the beginning. However, when I look back at my journey, it's taken me a lot of time to reflect as to how I fell into this field. And initially I had thought that I chose this field. However, I realized that it chose me. And then I try to unpack what that actually means. And it brings me back to my childhood, living in Nigeria with my parents, and half Nigerian, half Filipino. We have had numerous challenges. We've been displaced numerous times due to violence and conflict. And during that process and during that time, our community took us in. So in Nigeria, Nigerians were very community oriented, same as Filipinos. And if you're experiencing hardship, you look to your community. Yes. So they're always there to support you and help you. And so we got taken in. And after we had gone through that, when my parents became financially stable, they decided to give back to the community. And doing that meant building rental housing for individuals that had challenges, securing affordable, equitable housing. And so they did that. And I remember as a child, I thought that was a business venture for them. It was an opportunity for them to make money. But I quickly realized that they were doing it to give back. And there were individuals who couldn't pay their rent. And my parents would say, that's fine. They wouldn't pay for rent and they would live there for free. And I remember telling my parents, no, why are you doing that? We need the money. And my parents saying to me, you know what? We have gone through this before. And our community helped us. We leaned on our religion, we leaned on each other, we leaned on our community as the pillars that supported us through this. And it's our turn to give back because God has put us in that position. So going through that, I came to Canada. And of course, as a Nigerian, I wanted to be a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer, the typical stereotypical titles that we always aspire to get. However, I quickly realized while taking a course in affordable housing that there are a lot of individuals that are marginalized, more so individuals and population groups that are racialized and historically oppressed. And that really got me thinking, coming from Nigeria, realizing, Canada is a very rich country. However, so why are we experiencing these challenges? And why is there an overrepresentation amongst racialized communities? So that just dragged me right in, and I found myself engulfed in it. And then I did my master's in city planning, and I worked for First Nation. I worked on reserve to develop a community housing plan, and fell in love with the community because I found similarities between their culture and my culture. And I was welcomed into their community when I wasn't welcomed in mainstream organizations or mainstream communities. So I spent the last 10 years working with Indigenous agencies and on Indigenous homelessness up until now that I decided to venture off into Black homelessness and Black housing. So I like to say that this journey it was something that I didn't choose, but it chose me, and something that I feel the principles and values were embedded in me right from an early age.
Sounds like it, absolutely. Now you mentioned Indigenous and Black individuals. You're talking about the two highest overrepresented communities in experiencing homelessness, right? Every time we do a point in time count, so these are just counts, right, where we go out and try and figure out, get an idea of who's experiencing homelessness. When it comes back, the three groups that always stand out, of course, Indigenous, Black, and 2SLGBTQ plus youth and adults, right, that are over a smaller part of the population, larger part of the population experiencing homelessness. And you've done some research around that. Can you talk about, in your research, why is that? Like, why are we seeing a larger number of Black people experiencing homelessness?
Yes, that's quite interesting because when I got into my program, I'm a doctoral candidate at the University of Calgary's doctoral design program. One of the things that the program is quite different from your traditional PhD program, and it was different in a great way that they really push you to dig deep and identify on a personal level connections with your project. And so for me as a Black individual that has experiences with housing hardships, even in Canada as well, and also racism, I started having conversations with other Black people in the community and realizing this isn't an experience that's unique to me. It's actually an experience that's pretty common. So I started digging deeper. And like you said, why is that the case, right? Why are we experiencing these challenges now? Where did it come from? So I had to look back at the history of Canada because I have been given a sanitized version of Indigenous history and, quite frankly, no knowledge on Black history until I started digging into it myself and realizing that Black history is embedded in a colonial legacy of legalized slavery, dispossession, racial segregation, and discriminatory racist practices that were enforced through laws, that were enforced through court decisions and societal practices and norms. So when we look at the impacts that we're experiencing today, it wasn't created in a vacuum. These systems were set up to oppress certain groups like Black folks. And right now we're seeing an overrepresentation across the board. And we just talked about data and how we lack data and information gathering on the experiences of Black Canadians across sector. And that's what I found in my research is we lack that data. However, you have to really dig deep for it. And there are a few, but from those data points, you can see that Black people are overrepresented in the justice system. They grew by 90% in a 10-year span from 2003 to 2013, while the white inmates decreased by 3% during that time. And we look at overrepresentation in social housing. We look at Black people being discriminated against when looking for housing. The healthcare system challenges access in healthcare system. Educational system, we have Black people being expelled or suspended or dropping out. We have all those overrepresentations in all sectors. And that's why we're experiencing the challenges we're experiencing. So those act as pathways, and they're all, what underlines them is anti-Black racism. And so those act as pathways into homelessness and housing instability for Black individuals. And that's why we need to look at Black individuals and their experiences in a unique way and have more targeted interventions as opposed to lumping us into racialized communities and not collecting data on us.
I think, we've seen that over time where we tried to take a one approach to, and the needs are different. Now, you and I talked previous to coming on live just around access to, right? So you talked about these broken systems that are very broken and overrepresentation, but also not equal access, right? So access to affordable housing, access to healthcare, access to education. I think there's enough research to show that Black individuals would not have equal access, right?
Yes, definitely. There is. And when you look at it, sometimes we have people, when I talk about racism in Canada, a lot of people say, well, that doesn't exist. And we say, well, it does. And so even in my personal life, when I look at my children and my own experiences, when I try to access job opportunities, for instance, I don't get it. Even if I'm overqualified for it or I meet the requirements, I don't get in, except I actually know someone who can vouch for my credibility and my work ethic and all of that. But chances of me knowing people are very limited because I don't go around in that circle or that network. I'm not invited into it. So when we look at things like that, we now realize, well, this is why we're experiencing these issues, because the system has been created to function and discounted other groups and to retain power within that dominant population. So it's hard for us to access these systems that we were never meant to access them.
Right.
So,
Well, the way they're set up, right?
Exactly.
Set up, and we talked a little bit about the systems that are set up. You talked about other broken, and we had talked just previously. You take Toronto Community Housing as a whole; they do great work. Challenge, you see an overrepresentation, but not about how it's years and years. There's no, I mean, all that type of housing, so communities up for to be fairly temporary, right? To help as what happened with your parents.
Yeah.
The community helped you, and then we moved along, and they helped them. But what we see in social housing now is generational,
Exactly.
and so access in that area. A little bit of, why is that? Black families in social housing for 30, 40 years. It's just not going.
Exactly. And that's the thing is we know why they got there. We know how they got there. So now is we help them out of there. And I think working in the system, I have to look at things. We have to have a different lens equity are and how our practices have been discriminatory on Black families. The different there issues because racism in housing, direct housing homelessness. However, there are other contributors to why Black families are. So we have to be looking more. But first off, we really have great artists and the people that made this system for those that have been marginalized. We have to be arrested in a meaningful way, and we have to be the ones coming up with the solution.
Quite often, the voices of Black people are not included in making that's part of the reason. Right?
And during the pandemic, we had the George Floyd and the Black Lives movement and the protests, and what came out of that quickly came up with strategies and plans to address racism. And organizations that put together positions, a way to address it. However, you realize they have not just almost like a way to say, hey, diversified and we're hearing your voice. However, we're really implement the plan or strategies because you have. So we really need meaningful and not tokenism.
Yeah, it's so important. You know what? I'd say partly guilty is there was some, if there was, I said, I don't know what to do. We should be doing this work. I don't know. It's out of my realm. So we engaged with I and where that used to be, good for good for you, so where I am black and I have different needs, and if you're not seeing that I have, so tell me about your presented this morning, and you said, and we didn't get into it.
Well, there were been a lot to it because since at home project to finally be what I'm talking about